Thank you very much, Kamla. Thank you very much, Robbie, for that excellent presentation. So I'll try to kind of complement it as we go forward. So Kamla, permit me to switch off from the lovely picture that you're seeing. I want to do a short presentation to kind of put it in context so that when the question and answer comes up, I'll gladly switch back to my video.
Okay. Sure.
All right, so I'm going to share a presentation now. All right, so one of the things that I like to refer to is to set the correct context in which these discussion takes place. And a study was done by the, are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we see in the PowerPoint.
Right, great. So a study was done by the European Commission. And they suggested that euro $120 billion are lost each year because of corruption. And this is not Trinidad, this is in the European Union. So this is not unique to Trinidad. So let's don't think that we are just unique in being a totally corrupt society. Yes, there is corruption, but this happens all over the world. And one of the reasons that they put forward in their study, and I have it in red here, is the lack of adequate capability and management of the procurement functions. And they suggested approximately 48% is because of poor management. So let's use that as a context. So management carries a multitude of sins, really. So what are some of the roles and responsibilities of boards of directors? So I'll break it down into the roles of the board, the role of the individual, the role of the accounting officer, because all three plays a part in terms of the procurement. And I want to use that as a basis for some discussion later on. So Section 99 of the Companies Act states that every director and officer shall, in exercising his powers and discharging his duties, act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interest of the company, not individually for their own political will or gains, but is for the company.
Mr. Lalchan, the slides need to go on slideshow because we are still only on the first slide. So I think you went on to the second slide already, but it hasn't moved forward. Yeah, so if Sasha is there, it needs to go on slideshow and then you move it to the second slide.
I see the second one?
No, it's still on the first slide.
Let's try that again. How about that?
Okay, right. So you're now on the role and responsibilities of the board of directors?
Right.
Okay.
So tell me if it sticks again so that I'll just ignore it and just do it orally.
Okay, no, it's moving now. So we are seeing it. Go ahead.
Great. And also to exercise the care and due diligence and skill that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances. Additionally, have you seen the change in this slide?
Yes, I think you're on to slide 3 now, right?
That's right. According to the Ministry of Finance State Enterprise Performance Monitoring Manual, many of us refer to it as the SEMP manual. And this was developed by the government to guide the board of directors when they appoint them in terms of their position. The board of directors under the Companies Act 1995 directs the management of the business and affairs of the company. And the board must not usurp the responsibility of executive management by involving itself into day-to-day management issues. So that is very critical, and this is the directive that came from the ministry. Additionally, the board ensures policies and business decisions taken by the board level are implemented. It should ensure that the policies and objectives of the company reflects the policies of the government, and this is policy decisions. And the board is thoroughly familiar with the company and its operations and various publics. The board further ensures that the company is staffed by competent senior management personnel, set standards, and review management performance. You know, one of the things that we found out when we were going around and speaking to the different stakeholders, they were saying, some of the board were pushing back and saying, well, we need to get involved in procurement because we may not have a good CEO or a good procurement officer. Well, then, as Robbie was saying, get the correct person and pay them the correct money. You don't use that as an excuse to get involved in procurement activities. And it further stated, there was a letter that was written on 12th of September 2018 before the appointment of the board of the OPR. And that stated by the Ministry of Finance, and it was sent to all accounting officers, the responsibility for procurement and disposal lies with the Chief Executive Officer or other designated officer of the organization. It is to be noted that there will be no involvement of the Board of Directors in approving contracts, except for approving the overarching policy on procurement. So that was sent. However, on 8 January 2019, it was rescinded. And it was rescinded by a letter and said that the Office of Procurement Regulation would issue and review guidelines, prepare updates, and issue model handbooks and so on. So that we have done. So hopefully the position that we have put forward will be followed moving forward. And these are some of the, just in summary, under the Act in Section 13C, DE, and Section 30 and 54. Really, the office is to provide and issue general guidelines, model guidelines for special guidelines, model handbooks incorporating standardized bidding documents, speaking from one set of documents, procedural forms, including specimen contracts, and all relevant documents associated with the procurement activities, and to approve special guidelines and handbooks. So all procurement handbooks and guidelines, whether it's developed by the office or by the individual public body, has to gain the approval of the Office of Procurement Regulations before you start operationalizing procurement in your various institutions. And the public bodies are responsible for preparing their special guidelines. And if there are exceptions to our handbooks and guidelines, you state it, and that has to come back to the office for final approval. So that in itself will provide some safeguards for the procurement officers. Who is responsible for procurement? And here again, we have gotten a lot of debates and pushback, and some of the state enterprises are saying, but it is written in our constitutional document that the subcommittee of the board has to be involved. We have gotten an opinion from the Chief Parliamentary Council that states that if your constitution document says that there is a subcommittee of the board responsible for procurement, that by virtue of the act, once it's proclaimed, that part of your document is impliedly repealed, and you must take the necessary step to get it expressly repealed to be in coordination with the act. So that I hope is clear. So under section 61(1), it says any person who contravenes a section referred to in the first column of Schedule 1 commits an offense and is liable on conviction to the penalty specified in the third column of that schedule. And after I would have referred to custodial sentences and so on, the last two slides, I'll go through some of those sentences and so to just give you an idea of the consequences. So there are consequences to action. 61(2) says, for the purpose of the act, a public body shall, so it's mandatory, have a procurement officer who shall be responsible for public procurement and the disposal of public property for that body, including NP service station and port authority, and shall notify the office in writing of the name and designation of the procurement officer. So we have to be notified of all procurement officers. However, it says in a reference in this act to the commission of an offense by a public body shall be construed as a reference to the commission of the offense by the procurement officer referred to in subsection 2, or any officer who purports to act in such a capacity. So if boards of directors or ministers of government wants to act in such a capacity, they will be held liable. And if the offense was committed with their direct consent or connivance, or he with knowledge did not exercise reasonable diligence to prevent the commission of the offense. So that is very clear in the act who is responsible. So the role of the accounting officers now. The financial regulations under the Exchequer and Audit Act sets out the accountabilities of accounting officers. And it says under section 4, an accounting officer shall be responsible for ensuring that the financial business of the state for which he is responsible is properly conducted, that the public funds entrusted to his care are properly safeguarded and applied only to the purpose intended by Parliament. So all these fly-by-night projects and so on coming up, and it wasn't approved by Parliament through the budget and so on. So we have some questions there. All accounting officers are personally and pecuniarily responsible for A, the due performance of the financial duties of that department, and B, the proper collection and custody of all public monies receivable by them. And a lot of question has been raised in terms of some of the accounting officers don't even know what happens and some directives coming down. And how do they protect themselves in those cases? Section 6 says an accounting officer is not absolved from his responsibility for complying or securing compliance with the Act. And Section 7 says no accounting officer shall be relieved from responsibility for acts which he is required by the Act, these regulations, or any instructions to perform the performance of which he has delegated to an officer or subordinate. So he is ultimately or she is ultimately responsible. And then we speak about being answerable to the Public Accounts Committee and so on. And it goes on to say in Section 27(1) of the Act, and that's our Act now, the Public Procurement Act, that no later than 6 weeks, and Afra would have referred to this previously, no later than 6 weeks after the approval of the national budget, they have to publish on their website or any other electronic format information regarding all planned procurement activities for the following 12 months. Every public body, by virtue of the Act, now has to publish to the public all the procurement activities that they will be involved in for the next 12 months. So it's totally transparent. Additionally, the contracts that have been awarded and tenders awarded now has to be made public. You have to state who was the successful bidder, how much was the tender, the amount paid to date, the amount in any variation order, and that becomes a public document. So all the procurement of legal services and so on now becomes a public information document. And where any member of the public, if you do not publish those plans and so on, any member of the public could ask for, by paying the relevant fee, to get a copy of the Act. There is to be, and this is on recommendation of the office, a Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee that reviews the procurement record, including the report and recommendation for contract and award. And I'll switch very quickly to the next slide that gives a diagram of how this is going to work. So the evaluation committee sits together with the procurement officer, the named procurement officer. They do their evaluation and they make a recommendation to the PDAC, Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee. That we are suggesting should be headed by the head of legal or the head of finance, and you must have a subject matter expert sitting on that committee. Of course, you'll have a recording secretary. They make the recommendation for award or disposal to the accounting officer or CEO or equivalent. At that stage, if the disposal is agreed to on the left-hand side, they can accept or reject. If they accept, you go ahead and dispose of. So you don't have to go through the Board of Survey, through the Central Tenders Board, and so on now. That is a responsibility of the accounting officer agreeing based on the recommendation of the named procurement officer. If, however, they disagree, the accounting officer could have a discussion with the line minister. And the line minister and the accounting officer could look at an alternative means of disposal. And this is only disposal of stores and equipment. But once you go against the recommendation of the named procurement officer, you have to put it in writing and give the reasons and send a report to the Office of Procurement Regulations as to why you are not following the requirements of the named procurement officer. For the high risk, high value, big ticket item, we are recommending that you bring your board of directors in the picture because they still have a fiduciary responsibility. Not for approval, but for a no objection. If they have any concern, if they are aware of something that went wrong, they can ask for a review through the audit committee. And this holds true for both the procurement aspect and the disposal aspect. So in the case of the procurement, we recommend that they bring the board into the picture and let them know of the final decision to award, not to get approval, but to say whether or not we are happy with it, or we think something would have gone wrong, then they could ask the audit committee to investigate. So that's in a nutshell how it works. So some of the offenses, and I know many persons would have asked about these questions. Is it only the procurement officer? Who is the person that will be charged? I know Afra said everything has a custodial sentence, but there is one that do not have a custodial sentence, and any failure to comply with the direction of the OPR issued under the Act will carry a penalty of 100,000. That's the only one. Everything else is a fine and a jail term. The first one, failure of the member of the board of the OPR or a committee constituted by the board to disclose an interest in terms of conflict of interest in adjudicating a matter is 500,000 and 1 year. So my board and committees are also could face some serious consequences. Any false report to the office, same 500,000 1 year. Conduct influencing public officers. Bribery, conflicts of interest, corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, coercive, or obstructive practices, 1 million and 5 years. Bid rigging, 5 million and 10 years. And I know some questions were raised about what are we doing? We were appointed since January of 2018 and so on. We were reviewing the act to see whether or not this act is really fit for purpose. And one of the things we found out is that the definition in the bid rigging under the act did not constitute an offense. And we have recommended to the government a change to make sure that that now constitutes an offense under the act. So it was poorly defined really. Altering a procurement document, 2 million and 7 years. Contravention of a regulation made by the minister on recommendation of the OPR, up to 1 million and 5 years. If you split procurement contract, 500 1 year. Breach of confidentiality, 500 1 year. Victimization, if somebody reports in a whistleblowing or any form that something is not going right, and you decide to victimize them for reporting it, you as the individual, it doesn't matter where in the pecking order you fall, there is a summary conviction of 500,000 and 1 year. Any false failure to report collusion, you are a public body and you know there is collusion taking place and it's found out afterwards and proven that you are aware and failed to report it, 500,000 1 year. Concealing, destroying information required for an investigation. And as I mentioned in the previous session, we have wide-ranging in investigation power and audit powers. 5 million and 10 years. Now, this is very important. If you are involved in a small contract and you lose all your documentation mysteriously by fire or flood, or you know how these things happen, all procurement thing goes up in smoke and so on, that's not a reason you are supposed to keep now backup copies for investigation. 5 million and 10 years. And then failure to comply with the requirements with respect to confidentiality in a challenge proceeding, 5 million and 1 year. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to share, and give more time to probably have a discussion with some of the concerns that persons have. And I know some questions came up in the last session in terms of what the office is doing and so on, and what's coming. If you want to ask those questions and you have time, I'll be happy to answer those questions.